Hi, everybody. My name is Brenton Botkin. I am so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I am on the student team here at Handshake, and I'm really excited to welcome everybody today. A couple quick notes before we get started with this panel. We're going to have about 30 minutes of structured discussion about navigating the job search with a disability, and then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end for questions from you, the audience. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have as we go along using the Q&A box here in Zoom, and we will do our best to answer some of those before we end today. You can enable closed captioning during this session by clicking the Show Captions icon on your meeting controls toolbar. We are also recording this session and we'll make it available to everyone following the event on our YouTube channel and Handshake blog, where we will also include any of the links to the resources that we discussed today as well. And with that, I am thrilled to get us started. I'm particularly passionate about today's topic, not only as a Handshake job seeker advocate, but because I am somebody who has a mental health condition that impacts the way I show up at work. Due to the stigma around mental health conditions, this wasn't something that I was super comfortable talking about openly until recently, but fast forward to today, and I actually co-lead Handshake's employee resource group for mental inclusivity and neurodiversity. In this group, we often talk about resources that we wish we had had while navigating our own job search, and Lime Connect is one of those resources. They do really amazing work rebranding disability through achievement. And please note, just before we get into anything today, that none of this is legal advice. You should absolutely consult with your school's career center or a lawyer for specific personalized guidance about your job search. But just wanted to make that caveat before we get into it. And with that, Alyssa, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and give a bit of background on Lime Connect?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brenton. I'm so thrilled to be here today. My name is Alyssa Brower, and I'm the Senior Engagement Manager with Lime Connect as a visual description. I'm a white woman with about shoulder length, light brown hair. Today, my visual is a little darker because it's quite stormy where I am on the East Coast, and I'm wearing a black shirt today. So I am especially excited to be here because I too have a mental health condition. It's just aligned that we're here today and having this conversation. For those who may not be familiar with Lime Connect, we're a global nonprofit 501(c)(3) that works on attracting, preparing, and connecting high potential professionals and students. That includes veterans with all types of disabilities. We connect you with scholarships, professional and leadership programs, internships, and full-time roles with the world's leading corporations, some of our partners. So I'm really happy to be here and talk a bit about how you navigate the job process and how we can support you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alyssa. So I guess I'd love to get us started with some level setting. Alyssa, I know that over a fifth of US undergraduates report a disability, but there are far more who are navigating their academic and professional journeys without disclosing their conditions in a formal way. Can you share, in your position at Lime Connect, some of the common concerns or questions that you receive from job seekers who come to Lime Connect for support?
Sure. And just like you had mentioned, Brenton, I also wasn't someone who was very comfortable talking about mental health until, surprise, surprise, I started working at Lime Connect. I completely understand that there is reason that some people may hesitate to disclose. So perhaps there's a belief that there will be judgment of some sort, or maybe a fear of negative reaction or perception, particularly when we talk about the job place and the skills and capabilities that one may have. um, Concern that it may impact your career in the long term. Many of our network members have questioned, is this going to go on some kind of permanent record that could affect me working my way up my career ladder? Or maybe you just don't know how to have that conversation. And that's why we're here to help. But many of our network members, and we call our Lime Connect community our Lime network members, those who have disabilities. They found a lot of success because of disclosing their disability. So for some folks, the conversation with HR led to getting the technology and equipment they needed to be successful and work most efficiently. For other people who needed a flexible schedule, it helped them start their days a little bit later once their medication had kind of settled in and they were able to show up most effectively at work. And some folks, it's as simple as creating a code word with their manager to, alert them when maybe there's a flare up happening, or maybe I'm not having the best mental health day. Then their manager will know, okay, Alyssa's not working at her most efficient today, but we'll set aside something, then we can work on that later in the week or whatever the case may be. So when you think about disclosure and talking about disability, you really want to think about with your employer that it could lead to success on both ends, right? Your company is investing in you, even at the stage of welcoming you or inviting you for an interview. They are investing time because they think that you have potential with their company. Or if it's shorter term on an internship or longer term with full-time career, they're investing in you. So they also want you to be successful in that role. And when you're successful, they're successful.
Yeah, and I just speaking from personal experience, I, have a very because I was able to have a conversation with my manager. We have a really great open dialogue. I actually was out yesterday on a mental health day before we came in and had this big day with this exciting event. So thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we do have a slide here that I would love to chat through. Alyssa, I imagine that, as you just shared, one of the biggest challenges for some folks who are just at the starting the process of exploring their internship opportunities and jobs is deciding how to navigate the disclosure and accommodations process.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about this and maybe some factors that you consider and that you advise through Lime Connect?
Sure, absolutely. So at Lyme, we always say it's a personal choice. We would never say you absolutely have to disclose. But
Mm.
as I mentioned before, if disclosure means that you will be more successful and be able to work at your most optimal, then we certainly encourage you to do so. And there's lots of different touch points in which you may consider doing this. So that's why I shared this slide with Brenton, because I feel like it can really anchor and animate where you may be able to disclose and how to think through that. So on this slide, we have rectangular text boxes that write out each step that I will go over, and then various visuals for the workplace, application, job offer, etc. So the first point in which you might disclose would be at the point of application. Now, we always want to distinguish self-ID versus self-disclosure, because one may think that in that online application process where you check the box that says I'm a person with a disability, that's disclosure. It is not. It is self-ID, and that is a data point that is collected for a variety of reasons. Our corporate partners let us know that this information is what they have while collecting other demographic information. Often it's used for federal reporting. It's not individualized to you. It's just part of their data and analytics of the profiled applicants that they're seeing. Now, that information would not be seen by your recruiter, the interviewer, your hiring manager. Only would they learn about your disability if you did disclose. So that's why we like to differentiate. So when we say the first point in disclosure could be upon application, it would be, if you're part of a student organization on campus that's dedicated with students with disabilities, if you're affiliated with maybe some local or national associations that are in your group of disability, or maybe it's in your cover letter when you're describing strengths and skills that you have. That could be a place where it's not as direct, but it could be a place that you could mention disability is part of your life. Um, Before the interview is the next step, I always encourage everyone to ask the recruiter what your interview entails. So then that way you know what tools you might need to succeed. Many companies are going the route of a virtual or recorded assessment as a first stage in the interview process. So this may be something like a HireVue recorded interview. It could be a gaming assessment like Pymetrics. And in these platforms, not everything is necessarily accessible, and you might not know that until you get to the point of doing it. So just some things to look out for. If you request extended time for exams in school, it's a really good idea to request extended time in these platforms for recorded sessions. It could either be 2 times the amount of time, or sometimes it's unlimited time. And that ensures that you have ample time to process your responses. For gaming assessments, those are a little bit different, and they're kind of hard to figure out what the best accommodation could be because they are often randomized. So just as a, for instance, I love giving examples wherever I can. One of our network members who has a mobility related disability, she does not have the most strength in her wrists, and she was taking one of these assessments that required her to hit the space bar, excuse me, really quickly and really hard. And she was unable to do that. Now, it had nothing to do with assessing her decision-making skills. She just wasn't able to complete that assessment. So that's something that you may not know until that time comes. But if you can get as much information as possible about what the interview entails, even if it's in person, perhaps the physical environment, it would be good to know how that is set up. During the interview itself is the next step. Perhaps you're having a conversation and it's led to what types of um, inclusive practices the company has, or maybe you just have a very good, you're building a very good rapport with the interviewer, so you'd like to share that piece of yourself. That's great. But it also could be when you're addressing an awkward situation. This can often happen with anyone who may have a service animal. Sometimes that pulls the focus of an interviewer, and you need to make sure that your interview gets back on track and talking about what it's supposed to be talking about, the reasons why you would be a great employee for them. So that could be another stage. Many folks do wait until after they receive the offer before they start. Now, the post-offer pre-start date would be now that you know what the responsibilities are, what your day-to-day may be, there's lots of different things to kind of think through in what you may need. Now, if it is some kind of technology like a screen reader, if you're working in a physical office, it's good to know what kind of arrangement they have, because there are some offices that have an agile seating arrangement where essentially you just carry your laptop around to whatever desk is open. But for a variety of reasons, that may not be good for you. Perhaps you need to be seated in a distraction-free area, or maybe light impacts you in a different way. So having where you can adjust the lighting would be helpful. So if you know these certain accommodations that could be helpful, we certainly encourage you to ask as soon as possible, so then HR or whoever has to have those pieces in place can have them ready for you on your first day. And you also might disclose during employment. This happens for a variety of reasons. Perhaps you haven't been quite comfortable doing so throughout the recruitment process, or maybe new symptoms arise, or symptoms are enhanced a little bit more because of the work structure, and you weren't anticipating that. So that's actually something that's personal to me. I do have a mental health condition. I also am prone to migraines. So when I was working in a physical office, I work from home now, but when I was working in a physical office, I started in kind of a open cubicle setting. And then when I was promoted, yay, I got my own office, but there were no windows in that office. And I realized very quickly that I required natural light in order to keep my migraines at bay. So that was something that I hadn't experienced until I experienced it. And after I realized that, I was moved to a location that had that natural light and was able to help me avoid my migraine. So there are lots of different times in which you might disclose. You also might decide not to disclose at all, and that's totally fine.
Thank you so much for walking through that. And I have to say as well, sometimes you're still on a diagnosis journey when you're,
Mhm.
in your job. I know for myself that that definitely was the case. And it's a continual journey.
Yeah,
uh,
and folks acquire disabilities at
sure.
every different stage. So if also don't think that if you didn't check that box that says I'm a person with a disability, that it will be held against you at any point.
Right, absolutely. Well, that was super helpful just hearing the kind of different options available to folks. And I know that there have been some questions rolling in. We have some folks from Lime and from Handshake who are in the chat responding to questions there, but we'll also save some time to get to some of these questions at the end. So feel free to use that Q&A box throughout. Um, and I definitely want to get into some questions here, Alyssa, about identifying employers that could be a good fit for you as somebody with a disability as you're navigating the job search. I know Handshake has hundreds of thousands of employers that recruit on the platform. I know that Lime Connect works with really awesome corporate partners like Google and Microsoft, Johnson and Johnson, EY, and the NFL. Are there any common, what I would call green flags or positive indicators that you're headed to an environment that is inclusive, that anything that you've noticed about companies that actively work to create those inclusive workplaces for hires with disabilities?
Yeah, I think a growing trend that I've noticed is starting at the job description. So when there's a very detailed job description that lists out all of the requirements as, as extensive as you'll be required to lift 10 pounds, or, of course, if you're traveling, say you're in a consulting role or a role that requires a good amount of travel, how much of that time will be required for it. And then in the description as well, what types of benefits are they listing out? It's the first stage in kind of seeing how that company is committed to their employees. And I would say if that's very clear, then that gives me an idea that they're thinking about the candidate and all of the needs that they may have. Now, I fully recognize that we work with a very large corporation, so they have an infrastructure for having a lot of easily accessible information, meaning it's easy to Google them. So you may not see this with every company, but I would say if they have it, it's also really positive to see if there's evidence of valuing diversity and having an inclusive workplace. So if a company's website has a particular area for, it's called many different things, but diversity, equity, and inclusion, various efforts when they build out organizations that I know are represented here today, such as employee resource groups or business resource groups, ERGs or BRGs. I know there are a lot of students attending today, and I equate that to like a student organization. So it's an affinity group within the company that could be based on interest. It could be based on an intersecting identity. So those groups can be a really great support for employees that is separate from the employee's team or manager that you can have those conversations around. Um, and I would also say, as you're starting the recruitment process, if the employer has very clear communication about how to request an accommodation, bonus points for every stage of interaction. So some recruiters may have requesting accommodation in their signature line. Some may just ask at every stage, and that's also something to keep in mind. If you disclose to one person at the company, you should probably think that's you've disclosed to the one person. So if you are going through several rounds, don't necessarily think that that information would be transferred. You do have to make sure that you have what you need at every stage. But those are some green flags that I think are super helpful. Again, with smaller companies, the practices might be a little bit different, even if it's something that you can see, like, what are they posting on LinkedIn? What are they talking about within their communication channels? Does it seem like they value inclusion? Those are some of the highlights, I would say.
Thank you so much for talking through those. And you were talking about employee resource groups, and I have to shout out the mental inclusivity and neurodiversity ERG that I co-lead here at Handshake. It is a huge asset and a fantastic community for those of us here who, identify appropriately, and I feel a lot of validation and pride being a part of that group. So there might be a couple of folks who are sitting in today, but I am very happy to have a company that creates that space for us. And so I would love to hear kind of on the other hand, on the flip side of the positive indicators that you just shared, if there are any red flags that you would want to warn applicants to look out for during the job or internship process, maybe any negative or no negative indicators that might indicate that an organization is not necessarily going to create as inclusive of an environment for you.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there to and platforms to see if they're an employer of choice, so you could utilize those. Um, and also, if it is a very Googleable organization, then you can see, are they in the news for something that maybe would be a red flag, that doesn't highlight inclusive practices directly within your communication. I would say if you did request an accommodation and they're not being responsive, that's not great, because they are, um, quote unquote, providing the space to do that, but then they aren't walking the talk of inclusion by actually giving you the accommodation that you need. Um, so that's part of like I would say during the recruitment process. And then I would say as you're in the role, if they're not very adaptive to different work styles, some people can think very linearly, and there's one way to do things and there's a cookie cutter model to do things. But as we know with disability, that is not the case. And that's what makes a team amazing, is that diversity of perspective and ways that you approach a problem. So if your employer isn't willing to work with you to figure out your best work style, then maybe it's not the best fit.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing to keep in mind is just how adaptable are they already showing themselves to be throughout the application and interview process, right? I think that's a really solid indicator of what you can expect when you're actually in seat in a role. And a lot of the folks on the line here today are folks who are maybe still in school, still navigating career fairs, networking events, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Are there any questions that you would recommend asking in those settings, whether it's a career fair, a networking event, or in the interview process, to kind of suss out any of the flags that we just talked about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely ask about all those different types of opportunities. Do they have employee resource groups? Do they provide accommodations? If you don't want to be direct because you don't actually want to disclose, I think you can go about doing that in a less direct way. So it doesn't necessarily need to be disability inclusion, but it could be diversity inclusion efforts. You can also ask things about what their standard work schedule is like. What's their opportunities for community involvement? I feel like when you start to collect those responses, you may hear people say, well, I personally work 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but we have coworkers, because of their schedules, they work 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Or like you can start to see the indications of flexibility and adaptability. And then you can also see where they provide their employees with the opportunity to engage with their community. Like, are they really committed to the whole person as an employee? And hopefully, again, this will prompt the recruiter, whoever you're speaking to talk about those related initiatives and what they're able to provide the employees.
Thank you for talking through that. And, we are in May, right? This
Mm.
is a prime time for folks who might be entering into their job search or perhaps heading into a new job or internship for the summer. Do you have any tips for people who might necessarily or who might be kind of just diving into their first role or getting started in
Mhm.
an organization?
Yeah, again, it varies what the company will be able to provide. Professional networking is super important, but honestly, community is super important as well. So if you have that access to an employee resource group, or being able to be engaged in events at work that kind of demonstrate the other side of the company that's not just within your job description, I think building that community is really helpful, and finding a space where you can connect with others is super helpful. Shameless plug, but Lime Connect is a great place to build community. We have um, over 30,000 network members now, and they range from experience level as young as graduating high school seniors, and with folks who are 20 plus years into their career. So you can really access some great peer-to-peer connection, and also obviously connect with our corporate partners. It's totally free to join Lime Connect. It's totally free to be part of our events. We host recruitment receptions that are virtual and in person. And it's nice because it kind of sets the tone already. All of our corporate partners already know. They won't know specifics about your disability as part of our network, but they already know that this is the population that we have. So with our vetting of those companies, hopefully that means that it's creating the right type of environment for connection and networking. Um, and of course, we also have a career coach on staff. So you can kind of get the Lime Connect perspective, but I would say, of course, utilize career services. I feel like I will admit I underutilized career services when I was in college. They are there to help you really show up as your most successful self throughout the recruitment process and employment process. And then accessibility services or disability services offices as well. They can provide that other lens to things. So just make sure you're accessing every support system you have, because that will really help you approach this next phase as you're building your career and showing up as your most successful self.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm definitely gonna also encourage folks to not only check out the Lyme community, but if you're still in school, absolutely access your school's career services center and your accessibility resources on campus as well, because everyone is there to help push you into a place of success, and everybody is wanting to support as best they can. So again, I'm gonna caveat what we shared right at the beginning of the session, but of course, please don't take any of this session as, directly applicable legal advice. Absolutely consult those individualized resources, and be sure to reach out to a lawyer as well if you feel like you need legal advice. But we are, of course, touching things in a relatively broad strokes way here today. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in that are very specific, and we're going to try to get to some of those as well. And I feel like I've learned so much from you already throughout this session, Alyssa. And I want to make sure that we make space for some of the questions that we have been receiving in the chat throughout this session. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure we chat about that I think you touched on a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure that we chat through again is most folks are applying in an online setting during their job application process, and there's typically a disability checkbox or a self-identification checkbox. Can you talk a little bit again about whether that counts as disclosure and whether somebody might consider using that when they're applying online?
Yeah, so I can give you the perspective that our corporate partners have provided with us. They will always say, yes, please check the box, because they want to know that they are being inclusive and are attractive to folks from all different populations. However, we do not consider that self-disclosure. Our corporate partners have told us that that information goes with the rest of the census information, if you want to think about it that way. All of the other kind of demographic information that you're filling out, veteran status, race, ethnicity, gender, all of that information is just going into a data set, so that for some folks, they need to do federal reporting. So that's where it goes to. But the people who would be assessing you as a candidate, your recruiter, interviewer, hiring manager, your team, they wouldn't see that information. So it is your choice if you want to check that box. I know most people say if they check prefer not to disclose, then that probably means that I have a disability. So it's up to you what you want to do at that stage. But again, if you elected not to select that box, that indicator, it's not as if it would be held against you if eventually you would request an accommodation. Because again, disability can impact you in different ways at different times. As you had mentioned, Brenton, there are different stages of diagnoses that you may be still in the process of. So it's not as if it would be held against you, but the disclosure piece would be having that conversation around accommodations, talking to your team about how you work best, how your brain works, how you best perform, and kind of moving forward from there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for chatting through that. And to your point about, you know, disability is not necessarily a one and done thing, right? It's a
Hmm.
continuous
Hmm.
experience, and
Absolutely.
we're evolving. We have a question in the chat here that says, I often feel uneasy about disclosing during the application process because I'm not sure if my condition is severe enough to be considered a disability. I
Mm-hmm.
see my condition in the list of conditions that's provided in the self-ID section of the application process, but it only affects me a handful of times throughout the year. Can you give me some advice regarding this issue?
Yeah, that's a popular question, even for folks joining the Lime Network. They'll ask, am I disabled enough? And truly, it it is how you identify. I would say for myself, I largely self-accommodate. So I know now, after having my mental health journey for several, probably decades now, not to age myself, but after walking this walk for some time, I've learned the things that help me perform my best, both in my professional and personal life. My migraines, as I mentioned, I know what's when they're coming now. Most of the time, I can anticipate them. So you may even see me now looking out the window because it's right in front of me, to make sure my eyes are adjusting. My team members, I have a team member in the chat today. She knows that I will say, hey, I'm not able to be on screen today. I have to be off camera for my meeting because I'm dealing with a migraine. So that is something that do I need to tell people about? Not necessarily. But it is something that absolutely is considered a disability. And if you want to identify yourself in that way, again, it's your choice. But I wouldn't limit yourself by thinking, well, it doesn't impact me enough. It does impact your life on a regular basis. People have flare ups often with chronic health conditions. Again, sometimes it's anticipated, sometimes not. So things can impact you in different ways, and your disability could change over time as well. So you might require different accommodations or different flexibility throughout your career.
Absolutely. I relate to that a lot. And I find that having navigated conversations around my mental health condition, even if it only impacts me intermittently, when I do have bad days, which don't happen super frequently, but there are times and seasons where it does. And
Mm-hmm.
having navigated those conversations previously gives me the space to not have to explain myself from the
Right.
start when I need to take a day, or when I need to, not be on camera, or any of those different things that I do when I'm kind of self accommodating, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it is a personal decision. It totally depends on your own degree of comfort, but that is very relatable to me, just hearing what you just shared. I have another question here. I know we talked about red flags on the employer side, and things that you can look at as an applicant that might be an indicator of, an inclusive environment or a less inclusive environment. But we have a question about your own personal red flags, which, I would hesitate to call them red flags, but the question is, do you have any thoughts on if or how to explain things that might appear as red flags, such as gaps on a resume, a pause in
Mm.
schooling or work, to a potential employer or recruiter at various stages of the job search process, whether it's interviews, cover letters, networking events, etc. I find this difficult in more casual settings like networking or informational interviews.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you. Um, it happens all the time. So trust me, it's even if it feels like you're the only candidate whom that this may be the situation for, it happens all the time. There are lots of different reasons why someone may need to take a gap in a semester or um, for the full year. And also, there are different things that may impact your GPA. What I would say is it's not a red flag. If on the application they are giving you a space, I know you're asking during networking and more casual settings, but also if you see it in an application where there is a space to kind of explain that, our corporate partners have told us, please let us know, because then we're not making assumptions. We can understand why you may have taken a semester off. And again, you don't need to go into the medical nitty gritty about everything. You can just say a very broad statement of, I was on medical leave. for the fall semester or whatever the case may be. And there shouldn't be any follow-up questions after that. So if there's a space in the application or some point during the process where you can fill in the blanks there, that's super helpful. And again, if you're speaking to someone, if you are comfortable doing so, it's nice to be upfront and say, I needed to take the last semester off to address some medical needs, but now I'm back. And really, we always say, try to frame things as putting that positive light on things. So whether it's taking a break that may have affected your GPA, or perhaps you weren't getting the accommodation you needed at school until later on, or maybe you realized over a semester that you did need an accommodation that you didn't have, and that impacted your GPA, that's also good to let the company know about. So again, put that positive spin on things. Say, you may see that my GPA wasn't as strong during my first semester, but I didn't realize that I didn't have the tools I needed. Now that I've received my accommodations, I have increased my GPA by X amount, and I'm on track to pursuing, this coursework in the future. So you can, I know that was super broad and vague, but you can kind of frame it to your own personal story and really showing them, how you are progressing from that point.
Yeah, it's actually an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, right? And
Mhm.
adaptability. So I appreciate you talking through that. We have another question that I think you touched on a little bit when sharing your own personal story, and I touched a little bit on as well. But assuming you have already told HR or a supervisor about your disability, does it make sense to let a majority of your coworkers know that you have a disability?
Yeah. Um, Again, I know you're gonna get tired of me saying this, but it is your choice. We did a study at Lime Connect several years ago about disability in the white collar workforce or the corporate workforce. And we found that a majority of employees actually disclose to their team members and managers. Um, Now, if you're in a team setting where you do highly collaborate with others, it may be helpful for them to know that this is the way my brain works. This is how I best process information. I have team members who receive instruction differently. So whether that's in written form, we have a video call that they can record and refer back to. Again, for myself, I let folks know that there are times when I need to be off screen, and that's totally fine. So of course, it depends on if you have that familiarity with your team. Sometimes it takes time to let folks know, and that's okay. I know for our networks are kind of all over the spectrum when it comes to who they disclose to and why. Some folks just disclose to their managers, but not their team members. And also, sometimes it has to do with the kind of disability as well. I remember a network member who was very client facing, and he has Tourette syndrome. And he would say within like the first minute of meeting a new client, "Hi, my name is, I have Tourette, so that may be why you notice a tick or a stutter in my voice." And then kind of laid the foundation from there. Or we have a great special advisor who stutters and says, "Hi, my name is, I stutter really good. So you may just notice that in our conversation." So there's lots of different ways that you can approach that conversation. And I would say, Lime Connect is here to talk through those various situations. And you can hear from our various webinars and panels about the experiences of folks, again, based on disability type or perhaps their intersecting identity, how they've navigated those conversations.
And that leads really well into another question that we have here. We have an anonymous attendee who's asking about navigating kind of the social expectations of the interview process.
Mhm.
So where things like maybe maintaining direct eye contact or giving a firm handshake are kind of unspoken expectations, but they're not necessarily doable for various disabilities or
Mhm.
conditions. Do you have any advice for how to approach something like that, either proactively or in the moment?
Yeah, I think there are a few different ways. Again, it depends on how direct you want to be. So you can be very upfront and say, "Hi, my name is, I have low vision, so you may notice that I'm not able to maintain direct eye contact, but please know I'm engaged with the conversation." And happy to be connecting with you. So you can kind of like set that stage for positivity. And you can also, we have uh, folks in our network who approach handshakes in a lot of different ways. So they may offer a fist bump instead, or an elbow, or may offer their left hand instead of their right if that's where they have more strength and mobility. So those are the ways that I would say you can do that kind of on the fly. And then as you do that, perhaps it becomes your common practice. So then you always know, like, this is how I'm going to offer. And it may adjust as you work with other people or engage in different settings. There's a little bit of a tangent. So if you need me to clarify anything, please let me know.
Awesome. It seems great to me, but feel free to chime in the Q&A box if you need any additional follow-up. We're not going to be able to get to every single question today. I know that we have Evelyn in the back who is answering a ton of questions, but we will try to get to as many as we can. I have a question here that is it best to disclose directly to your supervisor or manager, or is it better to go to someone in HR? If HR, how do you identify the right person in that department? I know you've talked a little bit, Alyssa, about the different size of organizations and the
Mm-hmm.
kind of different structures and
Mm-hmm.
resources that might be available. So this might be one
Yeah.
of those situations where it's like your mileage may vary depending on where you are, but would love to hear your thoughts there.
Absolutely. And I am someone who has always worked in the nonprofit sector. So I've always worked on smaller teams. Um, and, you know, oftentimes HR is the CEO. And so that may be your supervisor or the person who's serving a lot of different roles. So again, I would say what you need should inform who you have the conversation with. So for HR, if it is something like equipment, technology, physical location of your workspace, or maybe the ergonomic setup of your workspace, that may very well be the right type of conversation with someone in HR. And really, with your onboarding, you should be informed of who the best person is to talk to. If not, I would say if you have a main HR contact, then you can start with them, and then they might direct you to the person who would be fulfilling an accommodation in the workplace. Um, if it comes to something that doesn't have to be going through HR, perhaps it may just be having flexibility in your schedule. For folks who have weekly appointments, it's really nice to be able to work it out with your manager to say, hey, I'll start a little early this day so I can make my appointment. I'll work a little later. And if your manager is flexible, then great. You'll be able to work that out together, and it doesn't have to go through various channels to get approval. You can just work one-on-one. So it certainly depends on the relationship that you have and what you need that will kind of guide you in who the best person is to talk to.
Awesome. Thank you for that guidance. I know we only have 2 more minutes. I would love to try and fit in 2 more questions if we can. And again, I'm going to encourage everybody to join the Lyme community if it feels like it would be of benefit to you, because I think that they have such great resources here. But I have a question about getting accommodations for a disability when you don't have a diagnosis yet. If you have an undiagnosed physical or mental disability, and you feel like people don't take it seriously because you don't
Mhm.
have a clear documented reason and it feels difficult to explain what's going on, do you have any guidance for folks who might still be in that diagnosis process?
Yeah, I would say, it's really helpful when you are approaching that conversation, regardless of who it's with, is to try to problem solve and figure out what at this stage, what do you know works for you, or what are you trying out that could be a way to help you. Um, so again, you don't have to have all of the answers, but there are some resources like askjan.org. It's the job accommodation network that lists all the different workplace accommodations that may be available. Um, but I would say if you have a good manager who, again, can be flexible and you can say, I don't quite know exactly what I'll need, but this is what has been helpful so far, then you can work out that conversation. Depending on the company and depending what you're asking for, HR may require documentation. I don't want to be long-winded about this response because I know we're short on time, but we have lots of examples of network members who have gone through that. And, sometimes it is an arduous process and sometimes it does take time. So hope for the best with a good manager, but there may be other channels you have to go through to get what you need.
Thank you. And you just alluded to this a little bit, but we have a question from somebody who feels as if they may need accommodations, but they don't know exactly what those accommodations might need to be, or if they
Hmm.
might be too demanding. They are concerned about how they might be perceived at work, or as if they're kind of burdening their team. Do
Mhm.
you have any recommendations for how they might be able to identify the accommodations that would be the most helpful for them and how to kind of combat that imposter syndrome and feeling like a burden?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the job accommodation network is a nice place to start. I won't say it's like completely inclusive of everything that you may need, but it does break out different types of disabilities and what types of accommodations could be made available. Employers do need to provide reasonable accommodation. So if it's not your exact tool, say you use a certain kind of screen reader, but the workplace is only allowed for liability reasons or whatever the case may be, compliance, um, they're only allowed to provide uh, a certain type, then of course you need to work with your employer to figure that out. But most accommodations don't cost a thing or are less than $500. So if you are working for a company that has a larger budget, they should be able to provide that. It could be something as simple as noise canceling headphones. It could be as simple as we had a network member who um, talked about how what he needed was to be able to use a number two pencil to help him type and to wear sneakers at work. Super simple to accommodate that, not a burden at all. But they're, of course, recognizing that there are certain things that do cost a bit more, but your employer should be providing that for you if they're setting you up for success. And also, I'll just say if you want to talk through what those different types of accommodations might be, in addition to Ask Jan, definitely join the Lyme community because we have a bunch of different community groups that address different areas of disability. So you can ask some of your fellow Lyme Network members about what they've done and how they've navigated. Your disability is your disability experience, so it might not be the answer for you, but at least it can kind of start you thinking about what could be the best fit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I feel like I have learned a lot here today, and we've gotten so many awesome questions. I know we weren't able to get to every single one, but I would encourage folks to check out the Lime Connect community and all of the resources that we've shared in the chat today. We will also be adding this recording to our YouTube channel and to our Handshake blog as well later today. So we will include all of those resources there for folks to refer to later. Um, Alyssa, I want to thank you so much for your time and energy today. And everybody in the chat, I would encourage you to please take 30 seconds to fill out our feedback survey so that we know what we can do to bring more awesome events for you in the future. You can also follow us on Instagram at Join Handshake for more event announcements. We have more coming up each month, and we look forward to sharing more perspectives with you from experts like Alyssa. You can also find the recording of our session on YouTube and blog later today. I'll reiterate that again. Thank you so much, Alyssa, and to everybody who joined here today. And I hope you all have an amazing long weekend. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having us and happy Mental Health Awareness Month, everyone.
Yes, happy Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you. All right. See you later.
Bye.